The Universal Tragedy Index had existed for over 12,000 years. It was created by the Archaeologists, a species so old that they had witnessed the birth and death of hundreds of civilizations. They had watched young species reach for the stars with hope in their hearts. They had watched those same species crumble to dust when disaster struck. After seeing this cycle repeat again and again, the archivists built a system to predict it. The index measured collective despair across entire populations. It tracked emotional wavelengths, behavioral patterns, and social cohesion. It had never been wrong. When a species lost its, the index could calculate exactly how long that species would survive. The mathematics were simple and cruel. Without a point of origin, without the soil that grew their first ancestors, without the skis that shaped their earliest dreams, a people would lose their sense of self. They would stop having children. They would stop building. They would simply fade away, like a candle running out of wax. This had happened 17 times in recorded galactic history. The index predicted each collapse with perfect accuracy. Ambassador Sola had served the Galactic Concord's humanitarian division for 300 years. Her species, were long-lived and patient. They had evolved on a world of endless oceans, and they approached everything with the calm of deep water. Sola had overseen the final days of two species. She knew what extinction looked like. She knew the smell of a people giving up. When the message came about Earth, she felt the familiar weight of duty settle onto her shoulders. A stellar anomaly had occurred in the Sol system. An unpredictable gamma burst, the kind that happened perhaps once in a million years, had erupted from a nearby star. Earth was gone, not conquered, not slowly dying, simply gone. The planet that had birthed humanity was now nothing but scattered rocks and radiation. Sola gathered her grief protocols. She packed documentation for refugee absorption. She prepared her most gentle speeches about dignity in ending. Then she boarded a conquered vessel and made her way to the surviving human fleet. 14 million humans remained. They were scattered across colony ships, space stations, and mining outposts. They had been spread thin across a dozen star systems when they died. Now they were orphans of the cosmos, and the index had already calculated their trajectory. Within 3 generations, humanity would cease to exist as a coherent civilization. Within 5 generations, the last human would die alone, wondering what the blue skis of Earth had looked like. Sola's ship docked with the largest human vessel, a massive colony transport called the New Dawn. She expected to find chaos. She expected to find people frozen with shock, unable to function, staring at walls with empty eyes. She had seen this before. It was always the same. But when the airlock opened, she heard voices. Not screaming, not wailing. Voices talking quickly, urgently, with purpose. She stepped into the corridor and had to press herself against the wall as a group of humans rushed past, carrying boxes of equipment. One of them nodded at her politely without stopping. She followed the sound of activity to a large meeting hall. Hundreds of humans were gathered there, and more were joining through holographic links from other ships. At the center of the crowd stood a tall woman with dark skin and gray-streaked hair. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady and strong. "We have 48 hours to establish the remembrance protocol," the woman was saying. "I need every cultural database uploaded to the central archive. Every language, every recipe, every song. We are not losing anything else. Not one more thing." Sola checked her instruments. The despair readings were exactly what the index predicted. These people were devastated. Their grief was a vast ocean, deep enough to drown in. Yet they were not drowning. They were swimming. She did not understand. The woman noticed her and walked over. "Ambassador, I'm Director, Emergency Coordinator for the surviving fleet. I assume you're here from the Concord." "Yes, I am here too. Assist with the transition." Director's eyes sharpened. Transition to what? Sola hesitated. In her experience, it was cruel to speak too directly. To whatever comes next. The Concord has resources. We can help your people find peace. Something flickered across the director's face. It might have been anger, it might have been amusement. Ambassador, we lost our planet 6 hours ago. We haven't even finished crying yet. We're nowhere near ready for peace. She gestured at the organized chaos around them. Right now, we're busy. Over the next several days, Sola observed. She took notes. She sent reports back to the Conquered that she knew would confuse her superiors as much as they confused her. The humans were doing impossible things. Not impossible in a physical sense, but impossible according to everything the galaxy understood about grief. They cried while they worked. They held memorial services and planning meetings in the same hour. A woman would break down sobbing over a photograph of a beach she would never see again, and then 10 minutes later she would be arguing passionately about water reclamation systems. Sola met a teenager named who had appointed himself the keeper of Earth languages. He was 17 years old, and he had decided that no human tongue would die as long as he was alive. He walked through the ships teaching Swahili phrases to anyone who would listen. His eyes were swollen from weeping. His voice never wavered. She met an old man named who had started recording recipes, not just his own, but everyone's. He sat in the cafeteria for hours asking people what their grandmothers had cooked. He wrote everything down in careful handwriting as if he were preserving sacred texts. My Nana's pasta is gone, he told Sola. The tomatoes that grew in her garden are gone, but the memory of how it tasted, that lives in here. He tapped his head. And now it will live in here too. He tapped his notebook. Sola sent another report. Possible instrument malfunction. Despair readings at 94.7%, which should indicate complete social collapse. However, observed behavior does not match predictions. Requesting technical review. The response came quickly. No malfunction detected. Continue observation. She continued. She watched a group of engineers argue for 3 hours about how to modify a cargo ship into a school. She watched a musician perform a concert to an audience of thousands spread across multiple ships, all of them crying, all of them singing along. She watched a couple get married in a cramped hallway, surrounded by friends who cheered through their tears. And she watched Director hold the fleet together through sheer force of will. The Director slept perhaps 3 hours a night. She settled disputes between ships. She allocated resources. She made the hard decisions that no one else wanted to make. And every evening she retreated to a small room where she kept a jar of dirt. Earth dirt, from a garden in Lagos. She would hold the jar and weep silently for exactly 10 minutes. Then she would dry her eyes and go back to work. Sola finally approached her one night. Director, I must ask you something. Ask. How are you doing this, all of you? The index says your people should be collapsing. The grief alone should be paralyzing you, but you are not paralyzed. I do not understand. Director looked at her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired but firm. Ambassador, Earth is gone. Nothing we do will bring it back. Our grief is not going anywhere. It will live in us forever. We will carry it until we die, and we will pass it to our children, and they will carry it too. She paused. But grief is not the only thing we know how to carry. We also carry hope. We carry memory. We carry spite. Spite. The director smiled, and there was something fierce in it. The universe took our home. It does not get to take our future too. We will build. We will remember. We will make the cosmos regret ever thinking we would be easy to kill. She looked at the jar of dirt on her shelf. Earth is gone, but humanity is not Earth. Humanity is an idea, and ideas are very hard to destroy. Sola returned to her quarters and stared at her instruments for a long time. The numbers had not changed. The despair was still there, vast and terrible. But something else was there too, something the index had no way to measure. She began composing a new report, one that would eventually reach the highest levels of the Galactic Conquered. The humans, she wrote, are not behaving according to any known model. They appear to be grieving and building simultaneously. I do not believe our current frameworks are adequate to understand them. I recommend extended observation and significant revision of existing protocols. Something is happening here that the galaxy has never seen before. She sent the message and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the place where Earth had been, there was nothing but empty space. And somehow, against all logic and precedent, the people who had lost everything were refusing to disappear. 6 months had passed since the death of Earth. The Universal Tragedy Index had crashed twice trying to process human data, and the archivists were growing worried. These ancient beings had maintained the index for 12,000 years. It had never failed them. It had never even hesitated. Now it was producing errors that their best mathematicians could not explain. Senior Archivist was 17,000 years old. He had personally witnessed the extinction of 11 species. He understood grief the way a surgeon understands anatomy. When the summons came to investigate the human anomaly, he left his monastery servers for the first time in 3 centuries and made the long journey to the surviving human fleet. Ambassador Sola met him at the docking bay. She had changed in the months since her arrival. She smiled more. She had learned to drink coffee. She had attended 4 human weddings and cried at all of them, though she still did not fully understand why humans celebrated love during times of sorrow. "Senior Archivist," she said, "thank you for coming." "I did not come by choice," replied. His voice was like wind through dry leaves. "The index is broken. This should not be possible. I built the core equations myself." "Perhaps the equations are not broken. Perhaps they are simply incomplete." The old archivist made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. "The index accounts for every variable of despair: magnitude, duration, social spread, generational transfer. It has predicted 17 collapses with perfect accuracy. It is not incomplete." "Then how do you explain the humans?" Did not answer. He simply gestured for her to lead the way. They walked through the corridors of the new dawn, and the archivist observed everything with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. He saw children running between compartments, laughing as they played games with rules they had invented themselves. He saw old people teaching young people how to cook foods from countries that no longer existed. He saw a man carefully painting a mural on a metal wall, a scene of mountains and rivers and forests that lived now only in memory. "The despair readings are accurate," said quietly. "I can feel it. These people are drowning in grief." "Yes," Sola agreed, "and yet they refuse to sink." They visited the school that the engineers had built on the converted cargo ship. 300 children sat in makeshift classrooms, learning mathematics and history and science. A teacher was explaining the water cycle, using diagrams of Earth's oceans and clouds. The children listened with serious faces. They knew that the oceans in the diagrams were gone forever. They learned about them anyway. "Why?" asked the teacher afterward. "Why teach them about a world they will never see?" The teacher was a young woman named Sarah. She had lost her entire family when Earth died. According to the index, she should be catatonic with grief. Instead, she was spending 12 hours a day making sure children knew how to read. "Because it matters," Sarah said simply. "Because Earth was real. Because my students deserve to know where they came from. And because someday, maybe they'll find another world with oceans, and they'll need to know how oceans work." "But the pain," the archivist pressed. "Every lesson must remind them of what was lost. How do you bear it?" Sarah smiled, and her eyes were bright with tears that she did not bother to hide. "I don't bear it, sir. I carry it. There's a difference. Bearing something means it sits on you and crushes you. Carrying something means you pick it up and walk with it. It's heavy, but you're still moving. We're still moving." They visited the music festival next. It had become a monthly tradition, rotating between ships so that everyone could attend at least once. When arrived, a woman was on stage singing a song in a language he did not recognize. The lyrics were about a river that wound through green hills, about the smell of rain on summer Earth, about coming home. The audience was weeping. Nearly every person in the large cargo bay had tears streaming down their faces. The archivist checked his readings. Despair. Crushing, overwhelming despair. These people were experiencing exactly the kind of collective grief that should be destroying them. But they were also swaying to the music. Some were holding hands. When the song ended, they applauded and cheered, and then they dried their eyes and began talking and laughing with each other. A child asked her father to explain what a river was. The father lifted her onto his shoulders and began to tell her stories about fishing trips he would never take again. "This is impossible," said. "And yet it is happening," Sola replied. They attended a birth next. A woman named had gone into labor on a small transport ship, and the event had been broadcast across the fleet. 14 million humans watched as a new life entered the universe. They watched as the mother held her daughter for the first time and wept with joy and sorrow mixed together. "What will you name her?" someone asked over the broadcast. Looked at the camera, looked at all the scattered remnants of her species watching from across the stars. "Terra," she said. "Her name is Terra." The fleet erupted. People cheered and cried and hugged each other. They raised glasses of synthetic alcohol and toasted to baby Terra, to hope, to spite, to the stubborn refusal to disappear. The index registered the moment as a spike in collective despair. It could not register what else was happening. Requested a private meeting with director. She received him in her cramped office, still decorated with the jar of earth dirt, and now also with photographs of places that existed only in memory. "Your people confuse me," the archivist said without preamble. "We confuse ourselves sometimes," the director replied. "Would you like some coffee?" "I would like answers. The index has never been wrong. It measures despair with perfect accuracy. Your people are experiencing despair at levels that should have collapsed your civilization months ago. And yet here you are, building schools and having festivals and nomming bobbies after your dead planet. How?" Director poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from him. "Let me ask you something first. In all those civilizations you watched die, what did they do when they lost hope?" They stopped. They stopped building. They stopped creating. They stopped believing that the future was worth investing in. They turned inward and waited for the end. "And what do you see us doing?" The archivist was silent for a long moment. "You are doing the opposite. You are building more, creating more. You are investing in the future as if it belongs to you." "Because it does." The director's voice was firm. "Senior archivist, your index measures despair. And you're right, we are full of despair. We are drowning in it. We will never not be drowning in it. Earth is gone and that wound will never heal." She leaned forward. "But despair is not the only thing we feel. We also feel love. We feel anger. We feel hope. And most importantly, we feel stubborn." "Stubborn." "We are a stubborn species. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, ice ages, each other. We survived all of it through sheer refusal to quit. That stubbornness is in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our souls if you believe in souls." She smiled grimly. "The universe took our home. Fine. We will build a new one. We will build 100 new ones. We will spread so far and so wide that nothing will ever be able to destroy all of us again. And we will remember Earth with every breath we take, and we will teach our children to remember, and their children after them. The planet is gone. The idea of Earth will live forever." Sat with this for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The index measures despair because despair is what destroys civilizations. That has been the assumption for 12,000 years. But you are suggesting that despair is not the relevant variable." "I'm suggesting that despair is only half the equation. The other half is what you do with it. Some species let despair crush them. We let despair fuel us. We convert it into purpose." She gestured at the window, at the stars beyond, at the fleet of ships carrying the last of humanity toward an uncertain future. "We are not surviving despite our grief. We are surviving with it. We carry it with us and we keep walking." That night convened an emergency session with the archivists. They gathered in holographic form, ancient minds considering data that contradicted everything they thought they knew. "Index is not broken," announced. It is simply measuring the wrong thing. For 12,000 years, we assumed that despair was the cause of collapse, but despair is merely a symptom. The actual cause is something else. Call it surrender, call it loss of meaning, call it the death of purpose. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. The humans have shown us that a species can be full of despair and still refuse to surrender. They have broken our model because our model was incomplete. The implications rippled outward. Some species in the conquered wanted humans quarantined. Their psychological anomaly was unprecedented. What if it spread? What if other species started refusing to accept their fates? The social order of the galaxy was built on certain assumptions about how civilizations behaved. The humans were proving those assumptions wrong. But others saw something different. They saw hope. They sent quiet messages to the human fleet, asking if perhaps some human advisors might visit their struggling colonies. They wanted to understand this strange alchemy that turned grief into fuel. And so, 6 months after losing everything, humanity began to matter to the galaxy in ways they had never mattered before. Not because they were powerful, not because they were advanced, but because they had looked into the abyss and refused to jump, and the abyss had blinked first. 30 years had passed since Earth died. Ambassador Sola, now considered the foremost expert on human psychology in the galaxy, stood before the Galactic Conquered to deliver her final report. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from 1,000 species. Some had traveled for months to hear her speak. The humans, they knew, had changed everything. They wanted to understand why. Sola was old now, even by standards. Her skin had faded from deep blue to pale silver. Her movements were slower than they had once been. But her mind was sharp, and her voice was steady as she began. 30 years ago, I was sent to observe the end of humanity. That was my mission. I was trained in grief protocols. I carried documentation for refugee absorption. I expected to watch a species die. She paused, looking out at the assembly. I watched them live instead. The data appeared on screens throughout the hall. The human population had grown from 14 million to 43 million. They had established 17 permanent colonies across 12 star systems. Their birth rate was the highest in the quadrant. Their suicide rate, which should have been astronomical according to every model, was actually lower than the galactic average. How? Sola continued. That is the question everyone has been asking. How did they survive what should have destroyed them? I have spent 3 decades studying this question, and I believe I finally have an answer. She told them about the rooms of Earth. Every human colony had one now. They were sacred spaces, filled with soil samples and preserved specimens and continuous recordings of Earth sounds. Birdsong, ocean waves, wind through forests, sounds that existed nowhere else in the universe anymore. Humans make pilgrimages to these rooms, Sola explained. They bring their children, they sit in silence and listen to the ghosts of and then they cry. They cry every time. The grief has not faded in 30 years, it will not fade in 30,000. She let that sink in. And then they dry their eyes and leave and go back to work, back to building, back to living. The grief and the purpose exist side by side, neither cancels the other. She told them about Director, now elderly but still sharp, still working. The Director had created the Grief Initiative a decade ago, a program that sent human counselors to other species facing trauma. The results had stunned everyone. 3 species that had been trending toward extinction had stabilized after human intervention. The who had lost their world to a slow-moving plague had been taught to mourn and build simultaneously. The Volar, whose son was dying, had learned to prepare for the end while still investing in life. The refugees from a war that had shattered their civilization had discovered that survival and grief were not mutually exclusive. The humans did not teach these species to stop feeling pain, Sola said. They taught them to keep moving despite it. They taught them that hope does not require the absence of despair. They taught them that a wound can be permanent and a people can still thrive. The archivists had formally retired the Universal Tragedy Index 2 years ago. In its place, they were developing something new, something that tried to measure not just the presence of despair but the presence of what the humans called resilience. It was difficult work. Resilience was hard to quantify. It looked different in every species, but the archivists were determined. They had been wrong once. They would not be wrong again. Sola reached the final part of her report. The great hall fell silent. I have been asked to explain why humans survived when so many others did not. I have been asked to provide formulas, equations, predictive models. I cannot do this. The human response to tragedy is not mathematical. It is something deeper, something that emerges from the strange and beautiful complexity of their psychology. She took a breath. But I can tell you what I observed. I can tell you what I believe. Humans do not refuse their grief. They do not deny it or suppress it or pretend it does not exist. They feel it fully, completely, with every fiber of their being. And then somehow, they transform it. They take the weight of their sorrow and they use it as an anchor, something to hold them steady while they build. They take the fire of their pain and they use it as fuel, something to drive them forward when everything tells them to stop. They metabolize tragedy. They convert sorrow into memory, memory into purpose, purpose into legacy. They carry their dead with them not as ghosts that haunt, but as companions that guide. They speak the names of the lost and in the speaking keep them alive. Other species have looked at the universe and seen indifference. They have concluded that existence is random, that suffering is meaningless, that extinction is inevitable. And faced with these conclusions, they have chosen to surrender. They have decided that if nothing matters, then nothing is worth fighting for. Humans look at the same universe and reach a different conclusion. They say, if nothing matters, then we will make things matter. If meaning does not exist, then we will create meaning. If the universe does not care whether we live or die, then we will care. We will care so fiercely, so stubbornly, so unreasonably that the universe will have no choice but to take notice. Sola's voice grew softer, but somehow it carried further. The tragedy did not break them. They broke our understanding of tragedy. They showed us that a people can be permanently wounded and permanently alive simultaneously. They showed us that grief is not an ending but a carrying. They showed us that the opposite of despair is not happiness. The opposite of despair is purpose. She stepped back from the podium. That concludes my report. The hall erupted in questions, but Sola did not stay to answer them. She had said what she came to say. The rest was for others to figure out. She made her way to a small observation deck at the edge of the conquered station. Through the windows, she could see a human transport ship preparing to depart. It was heading to the colony, a world called New Lagos, where they were building the 18th room of Earth. Director would be there for the dedication ceremony. At 93 years old, she still refused to slow down. Sola watched the ship until it jumped to faster-than-light speeds and vanished among the stars. Then she turned and walked away, carrying with her 3 decades of memories of a species that had taught the galaxy how to survive. Far away, on a station orbiting a distant star, a child named sat in a small room filled with the sounds of a world she had never seen. She was 7 years old. Her grandmother had been born on Earth, had seen the blue skies and green forests, had swum in the actual ocean. Her grandmother had died last year, but before she died, she had taught a song. Now was learning to play that song on a reconstructed instrument. The notes came slowly, clumsily. She made mistakes. She started over. She kept trying. Through the speakers around her, she could hear birds that had been extinct for 30 years, singing melodies that had echoed through forests that existed now only in memory. When she finally played the song all the way through, she smiled and cried at the same time, the way her people had learned to do. Then she wiped her eyes and started practicing again, because tomorrow she was going to perform the song for her class, and she wanted it to be perfect. Her grandmother had trusted her with this piece of earth, and she would carry it forward. She would carry it all the way to the stars. Outside the station, the universe stretched on forever, vast and cold and indifferent. It did not care about or her song or the world that had been lost. It did not care about anything. But cared, her people cared, and somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Humanity had looked into the face of extinction and made a choice. Not to accept, not to surrender, not to fade quietly into the night. They had chosen to remember, to build, to hope, to spite the darkness simply by continuing to exist. They had taken the worst thing that could happen to a species, and they had refused to let it be the end of their story. Earth was gone, the humans remained, and the galaxy would never be the same.